I'd like to bring to the stage a former mayor of a small town in Texas who went to undergrad at Stanford University and then went to a small school out east for his law degree. I think one of his buddies from law school is here with us. But he also went on to serve as the youngest member of President Obama's cabinet as the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Secretary Julián Castro. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good evening. All right. So I'm the one that got fooled this time. I'm happy to be here with y'all.
We really, really appreciate it. All right. So I'm going to get right down to business and ask a question I'm sure you've been getting a lot on the campaign trail. Secretary Castro, have you and your brother ever stood in for one another at an event?
We have not, except for one time when we were in high school. I stayed in the same class for 2 consecutive periods because everybody always asks you that question when you're a twin.
Yeah.
So you have to have a good story.
You got to do it.
That was our one story. Okay. Yeah. Not only that, my brother Joaquin, that I'm sure many of y'all see on MSNBC or CNN, who is in Congress, habitually goes around telling people that you can tell us apart because I'm a minute uglier than he is. He recently grew a beard for about a month, and then he shaved it off. Yeah, so my running joke these days is that he realized that when he didn't look like me, his approval ratings were plummeting. So he quickly shaved it off. Yeah.
Very nice. Well, I'm glad to learn of that story. Do you remember what class it was that you...
I want to say it was like English or, I hardly, but I think it was English or something like that.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, be sure to get a hold of your former English teacher and let him know what you did. The first question we like to ask, seriously, all presidential candidates on this show, is a simple but a fundamental question. Why are you running for president?
I'm running for president because I feel tremendously blessed in this country to have had the opportunities that I've had to go to the public schools, to get to go to college and to graduate school and become the first in my family to be a professional. You know, my brother and I both, I couldn't get rid of him, so we went to college and law school together, and then both of us became attorneys, both went into public service. And so I want, in this 21st century, for everybody, no matter who you are in this country, to be able to achieve your dreams the way that I feel I've been able to achieve mine. I also am running because I have a very different, compelling vision for the future of this country to be the smartest, the healthiest, the fairest, and the most prosperous nation on earth in the 21st century.
Right on. Thank you for that.
Secretary Castro, this is a big field of candidates running for office. That's anyone announced today? I don't know if it seems like almost every day.
Almost announced.
Right.
I think Pete Buttigieg announced out in South Bend today.
Officially announced, today.
I want to say Eric Swalwell.
Eric Swalwell, right? Anyone else?
As far as I know, just those two.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's a crowded field of candidates, but it's a very talented and diverse field of candidates. Where do you place yourself ideologically, sort of in this field, and how do you differentiate yourself from the rest of everyone else running?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think all of us get asked that question all the time, because it's a question that people want to know. I mean, I consider myself progressive, right? I've been calling for things like universal pre-K, universal higher education, making sure that everybody has access to Medicare, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and a number of other things. I just released a very bold immigration plan that I hope folks will check out on my website. Yeah, I consider myself progressive. I think it's probably accurate to say that with 19 or 20 candidates, you're going to get people that on some issues are more over here and others are more over here. I don't think anybody is on every single issue the most progressive person. You know, people have their different views. How do I distinguish myself? This president has made a mess of our country and our government. And I'm one of the few candidates with executive experience as a cabinet member for President Obama, Secretary of Housing, managed a department with a $48 billion budget, 8,000 employees, 54 field offices, and having served as the mayor of the 7th largest city, not a small city in Texas, and we got like 1.5 million people in San Antonio. Right? And yeah, so I have executive experience and a track record of getting things done, and hopefully we can talk about some of that on education and other things. I also, as I said, have a compelling vision for the future, and I represent a new generation of leadership, and I believe that people are ready for a new generation of leadership. And you know, I don't say that as a slight to anybody else in the race. I just say that that's what I hear and that's what I feel when I get out there. Even if I weren't in this race, that's clearly what I've gotten from people here in Iowa and throughout the country.
And just to follow up you really quickly, and I'm sure you get this question a lot as well, how do you break through? I mean, right now you're considered maybe an underdog candidate. It's a big field. There's a lot of time left. It's April that we caucus next year, right? There's a lot of things that can happen. But as the race sort of stands right now, kind of how do you punch through and get more folks to pay attention to the very compelling vision that you're outlining right here? Yeah,
so, you know, we have 43 weeks until the Iowa caucus, but who's counting? Who's counting? Except those of us that are actually running, like the clock is ticking. You know? Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable not being a front runner right now. You know, I wasn't born a front runner. I didn't grow up on the west side of San Antonio as a front runner. I think most Americans, or a lot of Americans these days, don't feel like front runners, and I look forward to connecting with them and talking to them about how I'm going to help make sure, if I'm president, that their children can get a good education, that their family can get good health care, that they can have good job opportunities in the years to come. And my vision for this campaign is to build it slowly and steadily. I don't want to be, you know, hot in April of 2019 and then fade by the time we're in February of 2020. You know, I want to build it steadily and grow support. The debates that are going to start happening in late June are going to be a big part of that. You know, I'm confident that when we're on the debate stage that I'm going to be able to stand out. So yeah, I mean, we're just working hard. I'm doing what our families do, you know, go out there and work as hard as you can. Today, our flight in Chicago got canceled because of the snowstorm out there. And so we drove in from Chicago.
You had to drive?
Yeah.
Oh,
we
wow.
drove in from Chicago. I cannot take the credit for driving. Sawyer, who was around here, drove and grew up in Virginia, where it's a little bit colder. But you know, so I'm determined to build my support steadily here in Iowa, and I feel like when I get in front of crowds that I gain traction, and so we're just gonna keep doing that.
Thank you so much. So I gotta be honest, when I saw that you announced your candidacy and I saw that you were using the accent on your name, there was a part of me that just was jumping in just excitement because you don't see that often, and I also have an accent on my name as well. Mm-hmm. And that brings me to my next point. So maybe last week or 2 weeks ago at the University of Iowa, there was a group of students that were asked by NPR about their opinions of the candidates so far in the race. And one of the students talked about authenticity and this idea of candidates being themselves and being honest about issues that are prominent in our country. And as one of the highest profile Latino candidates, I know that means a lot to other communities across the country. And I'm curious to hear more about your opinions on how that's going to create this new generation of leadership that you just talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. No matter who you are, you know, or what your background is, I think people want folks to be honest about what they believe, about who they are. There's a hunger out there for straightforwardness and transparency, and I think a lot of that has to do with that we have a president that is so, you know,
You can
what
be
word
candid
would
on
you
this
use?
show.
I mean, you know, just, you know, there's this. Where do you start? You know, like, where do you start with this guy? You know, I mean, at any rate. So, but let me address your point. Yeah, when we were designing the sign, you know, the logo, this is one of the things that the candidates, like, you get into your design, your sign design, oh, what's the logo going to look like? There's a significance to that accent that breaks the box on the sign. That I don't think that that's ever happened before. I don't think anybody has ever actually had an accent, you know, running for president that's used it on their sign. And I did that because that's how I've spelled my name, with that accent, and so I wasn't going to take it off all of a sudden. I've done that with my campaigns, so that reflects me and who I am. And also because I do think that one of the great things about this cycle is that you have such a great field of candidates that represent different walks of life in this Democratic primary. I mean, you look at our party, this is the big tent party out there. And so for me, I'm just speaking to the issues based on my life experience and my professional experience. And I've always believed that no matter who you are, that you have to serve everybody if you're elected and you govern, right? You got to govern for everybody. At the same time, I mean, I recognize, I think that for the Latino community, there's special significance because this president's policies have been so bad and his rhetoric has been so bad. Some of y'all may have caught my CNN town hall the other night. They asked me a similar question. I said that what I do hope is that, you know, there's some little Latino boys and girls out there that, you know, that they'll see and they'll say, look, you know, he looks like me and I can do that too. And I think that would be a great outcome for a lot of young people in the country.
You've been credited as having developed one of the best plans for comprehensive immigration reform. And several experts in the immigration sort of sphere has commented on that as well. So if you can you summarize what your immigration plan would do for America for us on this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I have a bold and different vision for immigration from this president. As I see it, this president has he's basically said to us that we have to choose between a secure border and compassion. What I'm saying is that we have a border that is more secure than it's ever been, and we can maintain its security by continuing to make smart investments there, but we can also be compassionate. So my People First immigration plan does several things, but, you know, just in a top line, number one, it goes back, it treats people the way that we used to before, which is when we treated somebody who crossed the border treated that as a civil violation and not a criminal one. Part of the reason that we're dealing with this mess of family detention, separation, is because we have now this incarceration approach to people who are coming over that we didn't used to have. So I would go back to treating as a civil violation and undo the backlog that exists. I would invest in an immigration judiciary so that we can process people's claims. Remember, people are still in a system, you know, they still are in a court system, but we'd be able to process their asylum claims, or if they're undocumented, process them more quickly and make a determination about what's going to happen to them. Secondly, we would increase the number of refugees that we take in this country. And now I'm distinguishing this from asylum seekers. And I know, you know, one of the neat things about Iowa, you know, whether it's Waterloo or other communities in this state, is that y'all know the blessing that refugees have been to a lot of communities out here, right? Wherever those refugees have come from. But in the late 70s or 80s, we set the cap, I think, around 110,000, and today we're somewhere between 30 and 40,000. We've been going down in terms of the number of refugees that we take in. Y'all know that countries around the world take in a lot more refugees than we do. I mean, we're nowhere near what other countries are doing. And so I would like to see us at least go up to that level that's mandated by legislation, by statute right now. Third, you know, I would get to the root of the challenge, which is that you have a lot of people who are coming over here from Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, because they can't find safety and opportunity there, right? They're desperate. I mean, if you're a mom of a 3-month-old baby, what mom in her right mind is going to decide that she's just going to pick up her 3-month-old infant and make a dangerous journey of over 1,000 miles to go to a border without any kind of guarantee that she's going to have a better life for that child. It's that they're so desperate to get out of these dangerous circumstances. So what do we have to do, right? I've called for the equivalent of a 21st century Marshall Plan for Central America. I know that Central America today is different from Europe post-World War II, but what I mean by that is forging a strong and productive relationship with these countries so that people can find safety and opportunity there in their home country instead of having to come to the United States and present themselves at the southern border, right? And I think if we do that, that's a smarter way to do things, and ultimately will go to the root of the challenge. I mean, we had 92,000 people last month that came to the southern border, right? So that means we can continue to just try and handle this, as they come, but I would rather get to the root of the challenge. The last thing I'll say about this is that all of this is proof positive that this administration's cruelty has failed. Y'all remember Jeff Sessions like a year ago, he said, they basically said that if we would just be cruel enough to separate little children from their moms, that would deter more families from coming. And instead, more people are coming now, right? That cruelty has failed, and I believe that we should choose a secure border with compassion instead of cruelty. Right?
I want to hone in on some of the specific ways that this administration has been cruel on immigration. And let's just talk about what's happened this week. Kristen Nielsen, who enforced the family separation policy at the border, resigned or was fired because she wasn't tough enough on immigration for Donald Trump. If that wasn't enough, this administration was considering a policy of releasing immigrant detainees into sanctuary cities as a form of political retaliation. And that's not it. There's more. It was reported that Donald Trump instructed Border Patrol agents to illegally block asylum seekers from entering the country. The administration has a very cruel, draconian posture on immigration. But how do we reframe this discussion? It's an issue that he won on in 2016. How do we win on immigration? And maybe the question that I'm trying to ask you is, how do we go into communities in middle of America and the heartland and have this conversation with people and have them agree with us?
Well, I mean, that's why my immigration plan just represents a completely different vision. I don't think that we can be afraid of Donald Trump on this issue. I don't think that we can back up and think that we're just going to go around the edges. And I mean, he really does believe that this is the issue that's going to get him another narrow electoral college victory. So we have to, of course, make sure that people understand that we have a border that is secure, and we're always going to make sure that the border is secure. Every country in the world has a right to be concerned about its border, right? But also make it clear that we can do this in a better and different way, and one that is respectful of human beings, that is compassionate and that is not cruel. And the reason that I have some hope that this is going to work is because last Father's Day, I went down to McAllen, Texas, to one of these processing centers where they were separating kids from their parents. It's called the Ursula Processing Center on the border in McAllen. And I was there to join activists that were protesting the family separation policy. And as sad as the situation was that was happening there, the people that were protesting outside were white and black, and they were Asian American, and some of them were Latino like me, and like most of the kids that were being held in there. And it was just another reminder that aside from the color of our skin or people's background, that there are these values that unite us and make us stronger as a country that we can appeal to, right? Of basic respect for people, of compassion, of addressing an issue more effectively going forward. And it gave me a lot of hope. And that's what I'm going to take with me, and that's the vision that I'm articulating on this. Okay. The only other thing I'll say about that is that, he thinks that this is going to help him in certain states, but I'm convinced that this is part of the reason that he's going to lose Arizona, that he could lose Texas, and that he could lose Florida. So the 11 electoral votes of Arizona, which Kyrsten Sinema already won in 2018, of course, that Texas Senate race with Congressman O'Rourke and Ted Cruz was 2.5 points. And then Andrew Gillum got within 33,000 votes, and Senator Nelson lost by 10,000 votes. should be better for Democrats in each of those states in a presidential year. And so I think our first order of business is to go get back states like Iowa and Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio and Pennsylvania. But close to that, our second order of business, and I believe, if I were the nominee, that I can get the 11 electoral votes of Arizona, the 29 of Florida, despite my last name, and even the 38 electoral votes of Texas, which, you know, after we take care of that first order of business in the Midwest, you know, is the future of the party. Yeah.
Secretary Castro, I want to try and take the conversation maybe in a little bit of a different direction, more about the importance of technology in our world now, and especially how it interacts with the kind of rhetoric that we've been seeing in our communities lately. We've seen a rise in white nationalism and domestic terror attacks, perpetuated specifically by individuals who've been radicalized online. So I'm curious to hear if, in your opinion, does the U.S. government have a role to play in working with technology companies to address this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the primary role is with these technology companies, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or other platforms, to address this in an effective way, right? I do think the government has a role to play. I don't think that should be first and foremost the role of the government, because you want the government, I still think that you want these companies to handle it first, right? Anytime you have the government saying this is going to be said or this is not going to be said, you usually reserve that for the most dangerous type of speech. And so I would first have these companies get better and more serious about their efforts to clamp down on all sorts of different, you know, ways that these hate groups have flourished on their platforms. And I think until recently, they really have not done their part. I would push them to do their part, and I do think that the United States government has a role to play in working with them. I'm a little bit, you know, hesitant about a heavy hand of government, but I do think that the government can play some role. I agree with you that what we're seeing is these groups grow. A few weeks ago, I was in Charleston, South Carolina, 2 blocks away from the Mother Emanuel AME Church. And, you know, of course, Dylan Roof went in there in 2015 and murdered 9 people. And it just reminded me that you have these folks who have been radicalized, and we see the same pattern. This also goes to the issue of common sense gun control, because we need to do universal background checks, limit the capacity of magazines. I think we needed a updated assault weapons ban, and we also need to look at other things that we can do to make sure that people who shouldn't gain access to guns don't. I don't know why somebody that has a record of domestic violence would ever get their hands on a gun again, you know, things like that. So I see these issues as completely connected, of working with these tech companies, you know, and also addressing the issue of gun violence.
Thank you for that. And, you know, kind of along that vein, we talked about a rise in white nationalism and domestic terror attacks and gun violence. We're seeing, we've no doubt seen the level of civility in this country lessen. There were talks, you know, after President Obama was elected in 2008, that we'd entered a post-racial world, and that we had effectively solved racism because we put a black man in the White House. But I don't think that's the case, and I venture a guess that you don't think that's the case either. In particular, there's a high-profile instance of racism and claims of anti-Semitism that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is dealing with right now. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about that controversy right now.
You mean the video that Trump put out about
Yes.
Congresswoman Ilhan Omar? I did. You know, I sent out a tweet saying that that I stand with the Congresswoman and against these anti-Muslim efforts of this president Because again, this is not unlike what he's done with certain immigrants. I mean, he's tried to create an other, tried to scapegoat or just otherize Muslim Americans. His Muslim travel ban was probably the best example of that. And he's using the Congresswoman as a foil. And not only that, I mean, just as a matter of fact, completely twisting what she said to justifiable, on a very sensitive issue. People justifiably are paying attention anytime you talk about 9/11, but they're paying attention and being misled by what the president has put together. And so I condemned it on Twitter the day before yesterday, and I stand by that. And what we have seen during this presidency has been a rise in hate, anti-Muslim hate, anti-Semitic hate, anti-immigrant hate, anti-black hate. And I wouldn't lay all of that on the foot of the president, but I would definitely lay some of it on there because he has fanned the flames of that kind of bigotry.
So how do we address that issue where we have the commander-in-chief fanning the flames of hatred and bigotry? Obviously, it is an effective electoral tool for the right. How do we break through that? How do we bring people together on these issues that one political party has decided it's in their electoral best interest to deploy on the American electorate? How do we fight back?
Well, I think you have to be very plain-spoken and blunt about it, address it head on. You know, that's what I've tried to do, to call it out and in very direct terms, to not be afraid of taking it on. And also, I mean, I do think that it helps people of different backgrounds to rise up and to reject that. Right? All of us have a role to play in our own back. And I mean, let me be direct here, that white America, has a role to play. In our playing, I know a lot of people playing a role of saying, no, that doesn't represent me. If you're trying to appeal somehow to me, that's not my family. Right? So all of us have a role to play in it. And I think when people see people of different backgrounds, of different faiths, of different colors, of different walks of life, rejecting that becomes powerful. On top of that, of course, there are the things that we need to do as people in the public realm of the messaging. And, if there's one thing that this president has become good at over his career, his skill is in marketing, right? I mean, he knows how to market to people. That's his skill as a politician, maybe as a businessman, even though he has the bankruptcies, so maybe, but definitely as a politician. And that's what we're up against. And so I think be direct, be inclusive in people pushing back, and find compelling messages to combat that with.
I want to shift the focus a little bit and talk about climate change and Game of Thrones. Because Game of Thrones is really about climate change, folks. And I want to try to ask you two quick questions. Do you believe that Republicans are arguing in bad faith when they discount the scientific consensus around climate change? Or do you think there are genuine skeptics that this is a genuine belief held within the Republican Party?
I mean, most of them are probably acting in bad faith, if I had to guess. Some of them may genuinely not believe it. Now I'm talking about the politicians. Mm-hmm. If you talk about more just voters, probably a higher percentage of them, have been misled into not believing it. But I think of the politicians, of the congressional representatives, y'all saw this guy questioning John Kerry the other day, for instance. I think the guy...
MIT, right?
He went to MIT. I mean, this is the guy that went to MIT, okay? And he's acting like, what? I don't know what's going on here. I mean, come on, man. Like, what's going on. It's playing a game. The other realm that you've seen this play itself out is every now and then one of them will be direct about voter ID, for instance, right? You've heard them say, like, the real impact of voter ID. So, yeah, I think a lot of those folks understand that it gets them points with a base to say what they're saying and deny climate change. And also, it's convenient because they're getting a lot of money from these interests, whether it's the big oil companies or other interests that want them to say those things. So yeah, I think some of it's in bad faith, and a few of them maybe really are true believers and don't buy into it. But what we need to do, maybe on the positive end, right, is that we need to keep educating. And I and others have said, I said at my announcement speech, that the first thing that I would do is recommit the United States to the Paris Climate Accord, right? And I know that Senator Klobuchar has said that. I think one or two other people have said that, and so I'm not the only one who has said that. But if all of us are saying that, I think it's sending a message to the American people that, like, this is something that we need to do. This is a priority.
So my second quick question. On the left, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez put forth the Green New Deal, and a very ambitious and comprehensive plan to address climate change. But there are those within the party who think that it's a little bit too big, a little bit too bold, and not practical or pragmatic to actually become law. Where do you weigh in on this?
No, I like it. I like the concept of the Green New Deal. To the people that have concerns about it, I say, what's at stake here is that we know we received a UN report not too long ago that said that we basically have about a dozen years to get serious about climate change, or else the consequences could be tragic. So we need to get serious, and we need to be bold. To the people that have concerns about does it go too far, I would say, look, there's no question that between the time something is proposed and when it comes out on the other side of legislation, there's always negotiation, compromise, right? But it's better to be bold than not. And let me give you very quickly a very precise example of what I'm talking about from my old neck of the woods at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. In 2010, President Obama came out with this groundbreaking blueprint for ending homelessness in the United States called Opening Doors. And he said, the first type of homelessness that we're going to end in our country is veteran homelessness. This has been a real problem, right, for our country, and a shame that veterans are sleeping on the street. And we want to end it by 2015. I became HUD Secretary in the middle of 2014. When the end of 2015 came, some of the writers started saying, oh, you still haven't ended veteran homelessness, right? Which was true. We did not end it by 2015. But between 2010 and 2016, we reduced veteran homelessness by 47%, almost half. And we did that because Washington worked the way that it was supposed to. Congress appropriated voucher money for veterans to get housing. The administration led and pushed mayors and governors and nonprofits to align themselves. I know that, Chrissy was talking about housing first. That was one of the policies that was adopted in this push. And the result of that was that even though we didn't hit that bold goal, we almost cut veteran homelessness in half, which was fantastic and meaningful for the country. So I say on the Green New Deal, let's set bold goals, let's chase those goals, let's protect our planet and reverse climate change. And even if we don't get all the way there, we're going to make a huge dent and go in the right direction instead of being timid about it.
On a separate issue, if elected President of the United States, what is your plan to promote and protect women's reproductive rights?
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, my brother Joaquin and I have always been steadfast supporters of a woman's right to choose, and I would make sure that we protect that in different ways. First of all, by supporting efforts at every level, the state level, the federal level, to continue to protect reproductive rights. I see reproductive health care as an economic issue also in this country, right? It impacts women and families. I'd be very mindful when it comes to Supreme Court appointments about this. I share the concern that people have right now about the direction that this court is taking. Y'all have probably read that these conservative groups are out there looking for the right case to send up to the Supreme Court, hoping and believing that the new court, with its composition, more conservative direction, will overturn Roe versus Wade. And we need to work as hard as we possibly can to make sure that that does not happen. And as president, I will make appointments of people with progressive values, including on the issue of choice.
Thank you for that. You might have heard in our first interview, Chrissy Canganelli, I believe, laid a platform out for a potential run for president. One of the things she kept talking about, in addition to better housing policies, is access to health care for American families. It is no doubt that over the last 10 to 15 years, the question of universal health care has been front and center of many domestic policy debates. So, Secretary Castro, tell us right here, what are your thoughts about universal health care? What are your thoughts about whether or not access to health care is a right or a privilege?
I see it as a right. I grew up with a grandmother that had diabetes, and I remember that when I was growing up, in the afternoon she would go into the other room and she would inject herself with insulin. And then as she got older, her condition got worse, and she died when I was 21 years old. My brother and I were in our last year of college, and right before she died in February of '96, she had to have one of her feet amputated, which, as y'all know, is not uncommon. But that whole time she had Medicare, and so that was a blessing that she had Medicare, that she could get the care that she needed. I want to strengthen Medicare for the people that have it, and then make sure that everybody has access to Medicare in this country, because there's no reason that anybody should go without health care. People ask, I think people want to know also, well, does that mean that nobody could have a private health insurance plan? And I don't have an issue with somebody having a private health insurance plan if they want that, but I don't believe that the profit motive should determine whether somebody gets health care in this country or not. And I distinguish all the time between health care and health insurance. Too oftentimes, health insurance means the denial letter that you get from the insurance company telling you 5 different reasons why you can't get the health care that you need. Health care is getting the treatment, the procedure, and the medication that you need. Every single person in this country should get health care, even if you have your own health insurance. That's what I want.
So just as a quick follow-up, how do we get there? What are you proposing that we do? Are you supporting, doing away with the private insurance companies? Are you supporting expanding Medicare, Medicaid? What's the plan? How do we get there?
Yeah, so during the course of the campaign and before Iowa caucuses, I'll release my own plan, and also how we would pay for that, because I think that's a legitimate question. People deserve to know that. But in terms of paying for it, we would begin, of course, by repealing these tax cuts that went to wealthy corporations and to wealthy individuals. We will look at other ways that we can raise revenue. There is a lot of money in the system right now, right? But that money goes to profits for big pharma, right? It goes to profits in other parts of the system. And so we can devise a better way to make sure that that money actually goes to care that people need, the way that it does in other countries. And there are trade-offs that do have to be made, I know, along the way, right? But I believe that we should expand access to Medicare so that anybody that wants to be a part of it can be a part of it. There are a couple of exceptions to that. For instance, I think even in Senator Sanders' legislation, it keeps intact TRICARE for people in the military would still be on a different system. And I want to say also Native American health care on their reservations. So, but ultimately, people should have access to Medicare, and we're going to find the revenue that we need within the system that exists now, and then also by reversing what I see as 40 years of the tax code, expecting more and more from the middle class and the lower middle class, and less from people at the very top. We need to go in the other direction.
Secretary Castro, I want to take a step back and ask you a more philosophical question about how you view the world. I feel like a lot of the debates that we're having within the Democratic Party, a lot of the debates that we have had, they're best summarized by this tension between being idealistic, being visionary, being more progressive, or a practical approach to getting things done. So my question for you is, what's your theory of how change happens in our country? Is it by being bold and strident and sometimes uncompromising on your values and your ideas, or does it happen more incrementally?
Well, I mean, I think if we look at the sweep of history, and at least in our country, both of those are true. Sometimes you have things that happen that are game-changing, like Social Security or Medicare, right? You know, a lot of these were from fellow Texan Lyndon Johnson, too. Medicare, at least. But oftentimes things happen incrementally. But I believe in being bold, in setting, to me, leadership has always been about setting a bold vision for the future. Understanding that you may, as I said earlier, you may not always get to your ultimate goal right away, but I don't believe in just trying to just hit a single as your overall goal or strategy. You know, I believe in being bold and trying to reach for as much as you can get, and then even if you don't get as much as you wanted to, you're still able to make a tremendous amount of progress. And I think that people recognize today that we've fallen into this situation where there's tremendous inequality in our country. I mean, look at how many people now in communities across the nation are sleeping under underpasses. You've seen an increase in unsheltered homelessness. And the number of students who double up, they sleep with their mom or their family, you know, in somebody else's home, right? And the number of people who are working themselves to the bone, working 50 hours, and they still can't even afford the rent somewhere. And at the same time, we have Amazon that made over $11 billion last year, and they didn't pay any federal tax. And they were being offered $3 billion to go and locate their second headquarters in New York, including $500 million in direct incentives. I mean, something is wrong with that picture, right? And so, you know, I am realistic, and I think having served as an executive in the federal government, understanding it will give me the ability to be an effective president, to understand how to get things done. But I want to be, you know, visionary and bold as well. All right.
Thank you for that.
I was reading an article maybe earlier this week about how there are some schools that are implementing meditation for students who sometimes have a hard time in the classroom, instead of disciplining them either through suspensions or something else. And that's done a lot of help, I would say, in terms of the school to prison pipeline. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts about criminal justice reform and what you plan to do to really fix the system.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for the question. I was in Utah about a month and a half ago. I pledged to visit all 50 states during this campaign, and so I went to Idaho and Utah. Two places that not that many Democrats usually go. But the Democrats there were very, very happy that I went, very appreciative. And when I was there, I talked at the University of Utah to this group that does a college program for incarcerated individuals while they're incarcerated. And they don't get college credit, but they get to study, and it's a form of rehabilitating people, right? And so, number one, I believe in a criminal justice system that tries to rehabilitate people to get on a strong path to success after they're out. Secondly, as somebody said there in our conversation, you know, I believe in a society that gives these folks a first chance in life. A lot of people don't even have a first chance. They go to a school that is subpar. You know, they often grow up in neighborhoods that have been disinvested in, right? With too oftentimes police departments that over-police and sometimes target, especially young black males. And so a lot of times people don't even have a first chance in life. I want to give people a first chance. I see as part and parcel of improving our criminal justice system, improving our education system, improving our police system, improving the chances that somebody has to succeed in life in the first place and never get incarcerated. I also think that we can build on the Obama administration's task force on policing in the 21st century, as we grapple with how we ensure that people are treated equally by police departments across the United States. When I was in Charleston, near the Mother Emanuel AME Church, and thought about Dylan Roof, and he got apprehended a few hours later after he committed those murders without incident, like he should be. But then I thought about people like Philando Castile and Eric Garner and Tamir Rice and any number of individuals who did not, right? Stephon Clark. We need to improve our police departments. We need to build on the First Step Act that was recently passed by Congress and was signed by the president. Continued sentencing reform, continue our reform of our cash bail system, so that people are not sitting unconvicted for 6 months or longer because they can't afford a couple of $100s, for bail. And then on the back end of it, I support efforts like Ban the Box. When I was HUD secretary, one of the things that we did was offered guidance to housing authorities that told them that just because somebody has a record does not mean that you should X them out automatically from public housing at the beginning. If somebody had a conviction that went to the heart of why they were a danger of living in that community, then you could make that decision. But you could not just X them out, just because they had a record. You had to go deeper than that to give people an opportunity. We want to give people who are not incarcerated an opportunity, a real opportunity, to get on a good path in their lives. I'm a fan of job training programs and organizations, whether they're nonprofits or companies, that specifically hire people who have been incarcerated. And as president, I would support that. And then to go backward a little bit, I also believe that we need to support our public defender system, because too oftentimes the difference between being in jail and not is whether you can hire the right lawyer to defend you. And that should not be the case in this country.
Wow, thank you for that. Secretary Castro, we had any number of other issues we wanted to cover, but we have gone long on time. And so as our producers get ready, I do want to give a few audience members the opportunity to ask you a few questions. So as our producers get the microphone ready, and maybe we'll come up with the house lights just a little bit so you can see who you're talking to here. I always like to ask guests on our show a couple questions just to kind of round us out here. And the first one is this. Give us some insight. I imagine running for president is a tough gig. So give us some insight into your life as to how you unwind, any hobbies. One of the ways I frame the question is, what are you reading right now? What are you watching on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon? You probably don't watch on Amazon, I take it. What are you listening to?
Yeah.
So yeah, just give us some insight into a day in the life.
Yeah, I mean, half the time I'm just trying to see what I can get on ESPN or sports. My brother and I grew up watching a lot of football and basketball. I missed Tiger Woods winning today at the Masters. I saw it on Twitter and it was already over because I guess they started early today. I thought they were going to start at 1 o'clock and be ending around 6. But I watch a lot of sports. And I always say we, Joaquin and I, because we kind of did the same thing. But we grew up reading a lot of true crime. So I have Netflix, and I was watching those Ted Bundy, tapes and stuff. Yeah, I see some people are. I'm not weird, I promise y'all. All right. Also, although this is odd, like the other day, I was reading on an airplane plane crash articles. Yeah. Some people are like, oh, what? It's just random because most of the stuff I read these days, I was reading a book about the 1960 presidential election called The Road to Camelot. And then I got another one that I haven't started reading called, I think, The End of Camelot, about the 1981. y'all can imagine doing this. You kind of get into it, and since you're going through it, it means a little bit more. And so it's been interesting to read that. And then also, my daughter Karina is 10, and so she's reading the Harry Potter books. And so I'm sometimes reading that when I'm at home. The hardest part of the whole thing, and I'm sure that most of the candidates, or all of them, would say this, but especially as someone with young kids, my daughter's 10 and my son is 4, is just being away from home. This time I'm away from home 7 days straight. The longest that I've been away is 8 days straight, and I've told my staff that, you know, I want them to break that up into 4 or 5 days so that I'm not gone that long at a time, because that's the hardest part.
Yeah, thank you. And the last question I'll ask you, we try our best to keep young people engaged in the political system, so our listenership is pretty diverse in terms of age and who checks out what we've got going on. So if you had a message for the up and coming generations of America, what would you say to them?
Oh, 2 things. Number one, I always tell young people in high school or college or middle school to believe in themselves and to surround themselves with people who love them and believe in them. I grew up with a mom that raised us as a single parent, but believed in us completely. And that helped me believe in myself. And so I tell people to not listen to folks that try and drag you down or don't believe in you, but surround yourself with people who believe in you, who love you, who are almost like shepherds in your life. And then secondly, I say that our young people, I mean, if you're 18 years old, you're going to have to live with the consequences of these good or bad decisions that all of us who are older, an older generation, make. So they have the biggest stake in all of this. They have the biggest reason to participate, to go out there and vote, and to be active, and to make a difference in their community and in the country. And there have been, a lot of inspirational young people like the Parkland students over the last couple of years, or these Dreamer activists over the last few years that have pushed and have accomplished a lot. And I would say to the young people, look at your fellow youth who are making a big difference, who have made policy changes in their state or in the country because of their activism. You can make the world a better place. Don't sit down and wait. Go and do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary Julián Castro.
Thank you.
So we've got our producer, one of our producers, I believe, Katie, is going to randomly try to work the room and get a couple questions here. So if you get the mic, please just introduce yourself quickly and make sure to ask a question and not editorialize.
Hi, Julián. I have a sore throat right now, so I apologize for my raspy voice.
No problem. No problem.
My question, my name is Oscar, by the way. In the current day, I believe that Donald Trump has tried to maliciously and intentionally divide Americans across multiple political spectrums and made us believe that deep political polarization is a growing issue in this country. Do you think that this belief is overstated, or is political polarization a real concern in this country? If so, how would you address this issue as president?
Thanks for the question. I do believe that political polarization is a problem. I believe, as I said earlier, that this president has fanned the flames of division. In fact, it's an electoral strategy for him. And there's certain issues like immigration or anti-Muslim rhetoric that are part and parcel of that strategy. What do we do about that? Number one, as I said, we have to be blunt, we have to be direct, we have to not be afraid of taking him on and presenting a different vision. That's why I released my People First immigration plan. Secondly, we need to change the tone from his divisiveness to somebody that is trying to bring people together, that fundamentally believes that we can bring people together. And then we really do have to make institutional changes. Right now, there's something like 13 states that have a commission form of redistricting. I support legislation that's been introduced in Congress so that each state would have an independent or commission style of redistricting, so that the people choose the politicians don't choose their people. And it will encourage congressional members to have to work together a little bit more because they'll have more diverse constituencies. In addition to that, I would make Congress subject to the Freedom of Information Act Right now, they're not subject to FOIA. You know, if you want to know what your local council member or state representative or county commissioner, supervisor, what their emails or how they're interacting with any interest groups, you can go get that. But Congress made themselves exempt from the Freedom of Information Act, which makes no sense, right? I would immediately propose legislation to make them subject to the Freedom of Information Act, to shine a light of transparency. And then third, in terms of institutional changes, we need to get big money out of politics and reverse Citizens United so that people have more power and not just these moneyed interests in Washington. I think the end result of all of that, and granted, this would not happen overnight, but over the course of years, would be that we would have a less polarized America.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dina. I'm a pharmacist working with HIV. I loved what you said about healthcare and housing. That makes such a difference for our patients. I was just curious about your plans for HIV funding.
Thank you very much for that question. I would increase the research dollars that we invest in ultimately trying to find a cure, right? But also, as somebody that you know, saw in action nonprofits and local communities that are serving people with HIV and AIDS, I would increase funding for housing opportunities, job opportunities, ways that we reduce the stigma that still exists of people who have HIV, right? For instance, in the housing realm, HOPWA funding has gone down. It's not what it used to be. You know, I think only recently was the formula changed, or they're trying to change the formula on how it's allocated to actually be more effective in terms of delivering resources to communities that are dealing the most with people with HIV. So I would look at all of those different ways across the board that we can impact the quality of life of people with HIV and AIDS, and then ultimately get to a cure for it.
Thank you. My name is Nouman Abu Isa. I'm the chair of the Iowa Democratic Party Platform, International Affairs. Thank you for your statement on the Marshall Plan for South America. We spend 57 cents on the dollar on military, and we need to do other things in South America. And we have done also a mess in the Middle East over the last decade or two. The heart of the Middle East is really the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And Netanyahu just won the election, and he said he's going to annex the West Bank. And we have been silenced on the Israeli behavior in settlements in the West Bank for the last 25 years. They've been negotiating, and while they are negotiating, the Israelis have been building settlements. It's like just like you and I are negotiating our pizza, and I eat the pizza while we are negotiating. So what is your action on this issue here, the heart of the Middle East problem and the Middle East in general? We spend trillions of dollars.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Like a lot of others, I've been tremendously disappointed with many of Mr. Netanyahu's actions, and certainly the rhetoric, his partnership with bigoted elements in Israel. I have a tremendous respect for Israel. I had the opportunity to visit the country when I was mayor. I believe that a two-state solution is in the best interests of everybody involved. And I understand, like you're saying, that some of the actions of this government have moved in the other direction, away from the possibility of a two-state solution. As president, I would do what I could in that relationship to try and move Israel back toward a two-state solution, because as former Secretary of State John Kerry laid out several years ago, before the administration ended, you know, Israel is going to have a, you know, it's hard to continue along the path that it's going in terms of the quality of life and the treatment of Palestinians, and being a democratic state and a Jewish state. It should embrace a two-state solution, but something like annexing the West Bank or allowing continued settlements is counterproductive to that. And I believe that the United States does have a role to play as a friend, as a partner, as an ally Israel is a strong partner of the United States. To try and move it in that direction, in I think a better direction for that region. That comes with dual responsibilities, right? I mean, there's somebody on the other side of the table there. And the role that we can play is vigorously trying to get them again to that kind of solution, even though I agree with you that it has been made harder, not only by the rhetoric but the actions of this administration. But Netanyahu just won re-election, and so the next president is going to deal in good faith with the Netanyahu administration and try and get toward that two-state solution.
Right? Supports BDS. Do you support BDS?
I don't support BDS, but I also don't support efforts to silence people who would support BDS. I believe that if somebody believes in that they should be able to support that.
We'll take one last question.
Thank you, Secretary Castro, for being here. And also, my name is Alex. I work at Shelter House. Chrissy is my boss. I serve at Shelter House in Corpus Vista. So first, also, I appreciate your stories and how you use we when talking about you and your brother. I'm an identical twin, and
there you go.
I unintentionally talk for us as well. So one thing that I really appreciate about your campaign right now and you speaking out in public was your pushback on Senator Sanders not wanting to have a conversation regarding reparations. I believe it's time that we have a conversation. It's time that we seriously fix the years of injustice against Black and African Americans. So, what is the most favorable policy to you on how we address slavery and Jim Crow, specifically regarding reparations?
Yeah, so I got asked this question a few months ago, and I said that that I have long believed that that our country can never truly heal until we address the original sin of slavery, and that if under our Constitution, if we compensate people because we took their property, if you take somebody's property under the Constitution, or the government does, then you have to compensate. It's not by one person's vision of what this should look like. I see it in a way, what has to happen as like the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa. And I'll just say frankly that I see this not only about the past, but about the future. It really is about how we can be stronger going forward. And it's not only about the descendants of slaves. I think it's also about white Americans and all of us, whether you're white or brown or anybody else, of how we get to a place in our country where we're stronger because we have healed, because we've forthrightly addressed this issue. I know that we also, could go on and not address it as a country. And you know what? The world is not going to fall apart if we didn't address it. In fact, that's what we've been doing, frankly. We did have the Civil War, of course, as people have brought up, and that helped to, that precipitated the end of it. But we also made promises back then, right after the Civil War, of what the descendants of slaves and descendants of slaves would get, that they never did. Right? So you could tell at the time that there was an intention and a recognition that this should be addressed, and then it wasn't. Right? And then when you layer on that everything that followed that, the Jim Crow era, the de facto segregation that too often still exists in so many communities in our country, whether you talk about schools or neighborhoods or other places. And I fully understand that a lot of, I want to be blunt, a lot of folks hear this and they say, like, what in the world are you talking, why in the hell are you talking? And I say, look, I'm being honest about what I believe on this, and this is what I think would be best for healing our country. It's what I think we should get to, and if we could do that, I think, to talk about the division in the country, this would be fundamental to getting past that division someday.
Thank you so much.
what a wonderful way to bring this latest episode of Political Party Live to an end. I do just want to give another shout out to our good friends at The Mill, our media partners at Little Village, and all of our staff and team and volunteers that make this work. We, again, are a volunteer effort. If you like what we are trying to do to make politics more accessible, to bring you in-depth interviews with, again, the women and men that are vying to lead the free world, please consider on your way out making a contribution. We are hoping folks will give $10, but if you can give a little more, we certainly would take that too. Thank you all so much. Thank you to Chrissy Caganelli for joining us. Thank you again to Brother Stephen Willis for the spoken word performance. And thank you so much, Secretary Castro, for joining us. We really appreciate it.